Thank you for having me. Thank you very much. So the first image you see here, this is the some of the staff at the Institute. We were dressed up in our folk costumes, or bunad, which is the Norwegian name for these costumes. We are standing here on the ice on the lake in front of the Institute. This was not this winter, but previous winter. It was 20 minus degrees Celsius minus. It's very, very cold. We are 6 people working at the Institute today, and the Institute is a center for competency and for research into the traditional folk dress in Norway. We've had many local traditional ways of dressing in Norway. Of course, some areas have been more fashionable and some areas have been more into trade and has been influenced by impulses coming from abroad. But especially in the deep valleys and the mountain areas, in the small villages, people have been dressing quite traditionally, right up until the Second World War. Are using their folk costumes several times a year, but mostly for the National Day celebrations, but also some family celebrations. And about 60% of all women have one costume, and they are used not only in public holidays and public celebrations, but also privately among families. And for most people, these costumes are something that they are very important to people, and they are connected, strongly connected to their family history. The same family usually will wear the same kind of costume, and some of them also are go through the generations. They are handed down through the generations. Debate about that, of course, what is what. But no, seriously, the major difference that we see is in terms of craftsmanship. And a proper folk costume should fit you well on your body. And often, if you buy something cheap and something mass-produced, it's not going to fit you very well. That's one thing. And the other thing is the quality of the material. If the craftsperson have used proper materials, proper quality, then it shows. And if he hasn't, then that will also show. These are not from the same area, so that's why they're so different. But if you look at the first lady from the left and then the fourth, they have the same costume, but they are dressed slightly differently. They have different aprons. But we always try to preserve the variety that used to be in the old folk costume traditions. We don't want a standard costume today. We want the old variety of colors and fabrics to be included. But what you will find, the one most recognizable thing, if you want to identify a costume from a certain area, is the cut, the shape of the costume. That will tell you a lot, and also the traditional headdress will be recognizable as something from either here or there. But you have to remember that we have over 400 different traditions, so it's not always easy to tell one apart from the other. We have seen in some parts of the country 100, 150 years ago, when for example, where a traditional costume was in the process of dying, in the process of going away, the last bearers of tradition would often slowly start to wear modern clothes, like dresses and knitted jackets and stuff. but they would often leave their traditional headdress. People who, or women, especially women who grew up covering their hair, for example, would continue to cover their hair until they died, even though they would start wearing modern clothes. So that's the sort of transitional sign, or part of the transition from traditional clothes to modern clothes. Back in the early 1900s, we see a lot of pictures with people wearing whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So we have typical examples where they have sort of misunderstood how things were worn, and they have women might be wearing men's belts, and they have jackets and blouses mixed up with other things. And they are simply wearing them because it makes them feel romantic or national. It was just important for them to sort of show some romantic sentiment or a national sentiment. And it's only later, it's only really after the Second World War that we worked more systematically with these things. So there was certainly a period right after the 1900s where people, it wasn't that important how people dressed. And sometimes I think people would just wear perhaps a traditional scarf and perhaps a brooch, a traditional brooch with modern clothes. So there was certainly a transitional period there where it wasn't, where only parts of the costume were worn. And today, it's not so common today. There was a period in the 80s and 90s where people would cross over and perhaps use the brooch or some elements, like the shirt, for example, with jeans, or yeah. There is a great interest in national costume or folk costumes in America, in the United States, and we actually have a lot of contact with the Norwegian American community in America. There's a great interest there. They do struggle to be able to buy their costumes. I think many of them orders them from Norway, either as complete costumes or they order kits so that they can make them themselves. But I also think there are people there who have classes, and I also know that there are Norwegian American museums who take some responsibility for this. And of course, we started on this path 100 years ago, when Norway finally became an independent country in 1905. There was a great interest in celebrating that, and the national costumes was a part of that celebration and that feeling of liberty. And so these traditional costumes in Norway was from the beginning, at the end of the 18th century, it was very much a part of the 1800s. It was very much part of the fight for independence and the fight for freedom. So it's been very much a part of our feeling as Norwegians. And I think that is still the case today. It's something that we do to feel important and celebrate ourselves. So it's 100-year-long history, but already from the beginning, I think we got museums. We got our first national folk museums, but also our first sort of national organizations that worked with folk dance or textiles or crafts in general. They were all established around 1900, and they all worked professionally to safeguard these traditions in many different areas, but also in terms of the traditional costumes. And so already from the beginning, there was a sense of that we needed to safeguard these traditions before they disappeared entirely. And so both organizations and people and museums have all the way worked together to try to make this happen. And then in 1947, the Institute was established. And I think one of the strengths that we've had in Norway is that we've had several sort of resources to draw from in this work, both volunteers and organizations, but also museums and institutes that have together worked for this. And there's been a great sense of cooperation between the different entities, really. But I think perhaps a different reason is that the interest have been very wide in Norway. So the Norwegian countryside has been extremely stable, and of course we've been fortunate in that way. So people still have collections of old clothes in their homes, especially on the ancestral farms. Still, people keep belongings from their ancestors, and that has enabled, for example, us at the Institute to do fieldwork around Norway to register these old clothes, and so that the traditions have been a part of people's lives for quite a long time. And I think the last people in Norway who wore traditional dress every day of their lives, they passed away in the 1980s. So it's not that long ago since we stopped wearing these clothes every day.